Unlike an industrial worker, agricultural labor is difficult to define, the reason being that unless capitalism develops fully in agriculture, a separate class of workers depending wholly on the wages does not come up. Several attempts have been made to define the agricultural labor from time to time. The first Agricultural Labor Inquiry Committee of 1950-51 regarded those people as agricultural workers who are engaged in raising the crops on the payment of wages. This was an incomplete definition because in India a large number of workers do not work against the payment of wages all the year around. So, the definition was changed and even those people who owned some land or were rural artisans but who worked 50% or more days on the lands of the others against the payment of wages were included in the category of agricultural workers. Further, a household was termed as an agricultural household if the head of the household or 50% or more earners reported agricultural labor as their main occupation. The shortcoming is the problem that would arise in classifying the household if the main worker moved to a city to work but the rest of the members remained behind. The working definition that is going to be adopted in this module is all those people who derive a major part of their income as the payment for work performed on the farms of the others can be designated as agricultural workers. For the major part of the year, they should work on the land of the others on the payment of wages. After studying this module, you shall be able to understand the concept of agricultural labor, be familiar with changing proportion of agricultural labor in the total workforce in India over time, identify the various categories of agricultural labor, identify the factors leading to the changes in the proportion of agricultural labor, appreciate the status of agricultural laborers, identify the government policies already in existence to improve the conditions of the agricultural labor. Let us now look into the proportion of the agricultural labor in the total workforce in India. During the pre-independence period, the proportion of the labor force in agriculture remained high because of the economic policies of the British and their endeavour to integrate the Indian economy into the world capitalist system as a subordinate partner. This left little scope for the domestic industrial development. Table 1. Percentage of labour force employed in the three sectors. In 1951, share of agriculture and allied activity was 72.1%, share of industries was 10.7% and share of services was 17.2%. In 1961, the share of agriculture and allied activities was 71.8%, share of industries was 12.2% and share of services was 16%. In 1971, the share of agriculture and allied activities was 72.1%, share of industries was 11.1% and the share of services was 16.8%. In 1981, share of agriculture and allied activities was 68.8%, share of industries was 13.6% and share of services was 17.6%. In 1991, the share of agriculture and allied activities was 66.8%, share of industries was 12.7% and share of services was 20.5%. In 2001, the share of agriculture and allied activities was 56.7%, share of industries was 18.2% and share of services was 25.2%. After independence, the process of industrialization was accelerated, so the number of the people getting employment in the industrial sector increased. But since the rate of growth of the population was high and the rate of industrial growth was less than the expected rate of growth, transfer from agriculture to the industrial and the services sector did not occur. Moving on to discuss the categories of agricultural labor. There are broadly two categories of agricultural labor. The characteristics are distinguished in the following way. Attached laborers, also referred to as the bonded labor, they are generally landless laborers. They are generally attached to some cultivator on the basis of a written or oral agreement. Employment is permanent and regular, but they are normally not free to work in any other place. In some cases, they also double as domestic servants. Casual laborers. These consist of all workers not falling in the category of the attached labor. They are free to work on any farm and the payment is generally made on a daily basis. There are various types of casual laborers in India. Landless laborers who are personally independent but who work for others. Small farmers who have very small holdings and are thus forced to work to make both ends meet. Tenants who work on leased land, but this is not their main source of income, which is derived from working on the land of others. Sharecroppers who, besides sharing the produce of the land cultivated by them, also work as laborers. Farmers with economic holdings, but who have one or more of their children and dependents working for other prosperous farmers. In British India, the number was too small to attract any attention, but the number have shown a continuous increase from 17.4% of the rural working population in 1921 to 26.5% of the total labor force according to the census of 1991. This implies that every fourth person of the labor force is an agricultural worker. Between 75% and 80% of all agricultural labor belongs to the scheduled caste. Next, we shall discuss the causes of growth in the number of agricultural labor. Increase in population, especially after 1921, coupled with a slow rate of economic development, which failed to provide employment to the population in areas other than agriculture. There exist both demand and supply related reasons for the growth in agricultural labors. First, with an increase in population, people tend to fall back on agriculture even with unchanging one demand for them for non-agricultural uses. In most manufacturing industries, transport and tertiary industries, the technology mix involves a more or less fixed and unchanging capital labor ratio. Even the land labor ratio is fixed. Decline of cottage industries and village handicrafts during the British period, cottage and village industries declined rapidly, but modern industries were not set up to replace them, forcing people to fall back on agriculture. This is a direct consequence of the British imperialism on the Indian economy. Rise in the rural population led subdivision and fragmentation of the holdings, which has occurred over a long period because of the laws of inheritance and the decline of the joint family system. This made a large number of holdings uneconomic and made their financial situations precarious, leading to the rise in indebtedness. Money is borrowed by small and marginal farmers at exorbitant rates of interest. Lenders also very skillfully manipulate the accounts. To repay their debt, these farmers then have to become agricultural laborers. Institutional reasons also played their role. In the Royatwari areas in southern India, land initially belonged to the farmers, but with an increase in the number of intermediaries, the land started slipping out of their hands and farmers had to adopt the status of tenants or agricultural workers. A lot of these tenants were evicted on the pretext of the personal cultivation and these were forced to become agricultural laborers. Development of capitalist agriculture in certain pockets in the country has led to the emergence of a category of migrant agricultural labor. Abortion of intermediaries, technological development in agriculture, cheap cooperative credit, expansion of marketing facilities and the pricing policies of the government have created a favorable environment for the development of the capitalist agriculture, especially in Punjab, Haryana and western Uttar Pradesh. This had led to the swelling in the ranks of agricultural labourers in these stated by people pushed out of their states like Bihar due to abject poverty. In sum, growth in agricultural labourers may be attributed to both demand and supply problems apart from the institutional reasons and the emergence of new production relations due to the growth of market economy, which was supported by the government by its instruments of support to agriculture. Moving on to discuss the condition and problems of agricultural labourers. Agricultural labour is generally considered to be the most exploited and oppressed class in the rural hierarchy. Before independence, their position was that of serfs who had to perform beggar on their master's land and house. Loans trapped them into the net of slavery, which continued from one generation to the next at least till independence. Even though the agricultural labour is the poorest class in rural areas, it is no longer a victim of extreme forms of oppression. However, the economic exploitation continues, their level of income and consumption remains low and they have no alternative source of employment. First, marginalization of the agricultural labour. The number of agricultural workers increased 3 times between 1951 and 1991. At the same time, the share of agriculture and allied activities in GDP FC has declined from 55.3% in 1951 to 37.9% in 1980-81 and further to 14% in 2011-12. The implication is that the gap per worker in agriculture widened markedly over the post-independence decades, indicating a marginalization process at work. Second, wages and income. The first Agricultural Labour Inquiry Committee reported the PCI to be rupees 104 in 1950-51, which declined to 99.4 rupees in 1956-57 according to the second Agricultural Labour Inquiry Committee. With the advent of the Green Revolution, money wages increased, but the real wages did not increase much because of inflation. Also, any increase in the real wage that occurred could not be sustained for 3 decades or more since 1960 onwards. A study done on agricultural wages in India by Pallavi Shavan and Rajashri Beda Matta indicated that during 1983 to 87-88, the daily real earning across all states increased. However, this slowed down between 1987-88 and 2000. Variations in real wages as well as increase in the interstate variations in male or female real earning also occurred between 1987-88 and 1999-2000. Differences between the average wages of males or female agricultural labour have widened over the years. While the daily wages of males is greater than the minimum wages level in most states, for females it is less than the minimum wage level, implying that gender disparities are actually widening. Third, employment and working conditions. All agricultural labour have to face the problem of underemployment and unemployment because most agricultural employment is seasonal in nature and there is a lack of alternative employment avenues to shift to during off seasons. Also, because most agricultural labour is unorganized and employed on a daily basis, they can neither press for the minimum wages, leave benefits, medical benefits, etc., nor can they ask for a limit on the working hour. Fourth, indebtedness. This is a way of life where incomes are low. Institutional loans are not easily available to the agricultural labour on account of their extreme poverty, which does not leave them in a situation to provide security for loans. Private money lenders or other non-institutional sources charges higher rate of interest and exploit them in other ways as well. Fifth, feminization of the agricultural labor. Over the years, the proportion of females in the agricultural labor force has increased. As the wages paid to them are generally lower, it has led to deterioration in their living conditions. Sixth, high incidence of child labor. The estimated number varies from 17.5 million to 44 million. One-third of child worker in Asia is found in India and the largest number of child workers in agriculture. This makes the poor worse off because employment of children brings down the wage level. Further, the child worker are denied education, which reduces their future earning potential even more. Seventh, increase in the migrant labor. Green Revolution increased the remunerative wage employment opportunities in pockets of assured irrigated areas, while employment opportunities in rain-fed, semi-arid areas stagnated, leading to the large-scale migration of labor from the latter to the former areas. Eighth, landlord-laborer relationship. This is intrinsically not a very stable and uniform relation with large inter and intra-state variations relating to the period of employment, freedom of movement, mode and time period of the payment, bargaining power vis-a-vis landlords, beggars, etc. Social customs, oppressions and forcible subjugation as well as the burden of the indebtedness have all strengthened their chains of serfdom. Let us now discuss the measures adopted by the government. Obviously, when an economic malaise is not corrected by the market, state has to step in. A number of measures have been taken up by the government. A number of policy instruments are used by the government. They are discussed in this section. Minimum wages. The Minimum Wage Act was passed as long back in 1948, but it was not found possible to fix the minimum wages for agricultural labor in most states till 1974 for a number of reasons, especially low productivity of the agricultural labor, small size of holdings of farmers and their consequent inability to pay higher wages, determination of wages by the traditional methods and opposition of any changes from landlords, lack of organization of agricultural labor, excessive labor supply and widely different condition of the employment prevailing in each state. While agricultural production has increased in some states, leading to a higher demand of wages, and land reforms have increased the aspirations of the agricultural labor, yet practical difficulties in fixing the minimum wages and the excessive supply of labor prevents the benefit of these legislations reaching those for whom it is intended. Abolition of bonded labor. It was only in October 1975 that the government issued a notification abolishing these practices. Later, a legislation was passed known as the Bonded Labor System Abolition Act of 1976, but complaints are still heard of the bonded labor from several parts of the country because either the agricultural labor is not aware of the existence of such an act or extreme poverty or economic compulsion forces them into the bonds. Providing land to the landless. The first plan made a provision of rupees 1.5 crores for the resettlement of the landless laborers on newly reclaimed land as well as the cultivable wasteland. In September 1957, the NDC proposed that lands obtained as a result of imposing sealing laws and those donated in Bhudan and Gramdan should primarily be used to settle landless laborers with priority being given to SC and ST. However, even though approximately 70 lakh hectares of land has been distributed, much of it is not fit for cultivation. Provision of housing sites. During the second plan, a number of steps were taken to provide house sites free or at subsidized rates to the agricultural labor. During the 7th plan, a scheme of financial assistance was included in the state sector as a part of the MNP. It has two components, cost of acquisition and construction assistance. In the 8th plan, it was suggested that construction assistance be given in kind. All schemes should have loan and beneficiaries' contribution to self-help. The program should be tied with that of other centers to promote the low cost housing, and an innovative housing finance system should be set up in the rural areas to facilitate supply of credit and mobilize rural savings. Special schemes for providing employment to agricultural labor, especially during non-peak seasons, have been launched. RWP, CSRE, EGS, FWP, NREP, RLEGP, the last two being merged to form the JRY in 1989-90. The primary objective of EAS, which was launched in October 1993, was creation of additional wage employment opportunities during the periods of acute shortage through manual work for the rural poor living below the poverty line. The secondary objective was the creation of durable community, social and economic assets to sustain the future employment and development. Special Agencies for Development SFDA, MFAL were created in 1970-71. Under MFAL, farmers with land holdings below 2.5 acres were defined as marginal farmers, and rural households deriving more than 50% of their income from agriculture were designated as agricultural households. 41 projects were adopted under MFAL, including irrigation, land leveling, soil conservation, dairy development, poultry, breeding, piggery development, etc. Other measures included the promotion of small and cottage industries and village handicrafts and the development of the industrial estates in the rural areas. Let us now look into the suggested changes in the policy. While a number of steps have been taken, one is not sure of how they have been implemented. While the loopholes in their implementation need to be plugged in for better results, one may come up a number of suggestions to better the condition of the agricultural laborers. They include improvement in the bargaining power of the agricultural labor by organizing them. This is not easy and is going to meet stiff resistance from those benefiting from cheap and unorganized labor for agricultural activities. Where the laborers and the landowners belongs to different caste, this is going to escalate the caste tensions as well. A suggestion is made about resettlement of the agricultural workers on newly reclaimed land. The only problem is with there being a limit on the quantity of land to be distributed. Creation of more alternative sources of labor intensive employment in the rural areas will increase the bargaining power of the agricultural laborers. For this, facilities of power, finance and training rural youth should be provided in the villages. Their working conditions need to better by statutorily fixing not just wages but the number of hours worked with provision for overtime payment. There should be a total ban on the child labor. However, it does not seem likely to happen when children are considered by employable assets by the parents in face of abject poverty and lack of physical and financial assets. Public works program have a role to play as well. Construction of roads, schools, buildings, digging of canals and wells should be undertaken so that the employment can be provided all year around. NREGA is an example. One needs to increase its efficiency by correcting the problem those crept in. Awareness should be created to end the social exclusion of marginalized section of the society. However, social institutions change very slowly. In the meantime, one needs to raise the standard of living of socially and economically marginalized sections by arranging for potable drinking water, especially for SC or ST who are not allowed to take water from the village wells for the social reasons, fair price shops, health centers, maternity wards, youth clubs, sports facilities, etc., as well as special programs for the vocational and technical training of the agricultural workers. Agricultural labours has no social security, earned leave, sick leave, no pension and no gratuity. The state must provide compulsory insurance on marginal contribution or no contribution and institute old age pension schemes so that the agricultural labourers do not have to starve or depend on the others in their old age. This comes within the ambit of the micro insurance or component of microfinance. Now, we will summarize what we have discussed in this module. The Indian economy has moved on a high growth path since the mid 1980s. After a dip in growth between 1990-92, liberalization initiated for aligning the Indian economy with the world in 1991 not only put the economy back on the higher growth path but also sustained this growth till 2000. During the last few years, India has been the second fastest growing economy in the world. Despite the high growth over the past 2 decades, concerns have been raised over the growth not being equally distributed. Policy makers responded to these concerns arguing for inclusiveness in the 11th 5-year plan in 2007. How has the rapid growth during the 11th 5-year plan period helped in improving the income levels of the most vulnerable Indian households? In simple words, has the benefits of growth been shared? The aggregate estimates routinely brought out by the Central Statistical Organization shows a feel-good factor that real per capita income has been rapidly growing. But there is little evidence on how this growth has been shared among the households in the rural India versus the urban India, and whether the households belonging to the different socio-religious groups have grown together. 3 rounds of the National Sample Survey Consumer Expenditure Surveys carried out between 2004-05 and 2011-12 suggest an unprecedented rise in the household expenditure and a consequent decline in poverty. These estimates imply that some benefits of the growth have been shared by the vulnerable households, but these data do not clarify whether poverty has declined because of new social safety net programs or because of the vulnerable households have participated in the general economic growth.